Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In this video, I'll give a full-length review of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, so I'll have to give a spoiler warning for the entire series of Deep Space Nine. If you haven't seen all of it, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, Star Trek Deep Space Nine was first conceived of during Star Trek The Next Generation's 5th season, as it was the height of its popularity. Having had a rough first 2 seasons, it had finally convinced fans it was a worthy successor, and Star Trek was really popular. So the thought came to create another spin-off series. Michael Piller explains that there were 3 options: another starship, a space station, or a colony. They decided early on that another starship would be too repetitive, so they went on to explore the outpost option of having it take place on an alien planet, but ultimately decided that Star Trek needed to be set in space, so it became the space station idea. I personally think they created the idea of the wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant in order to have their cake and eat it too, as the problem with setting the show in a stationary location takes away the aspect of space exploration. So they put a wormhole right next to the station that instantly takes one to the other side of the galaxy, or would allow aliens from the other side of the galaxy to come to them, and problem solved. It was also decided to take a couple of aliens introduced in 1 or 2 episodes of The Next Generation and fully develop them, mainly the Bajorans and the Cardassians, and make them the backdrop of the entire series. The Bajorans would play the role of the indigenous people the Federation were sent to assist, and the Cardassians became the show's main adversaries. At this stage, the Cardassians had only been in 2 episodes, The Wounded and Ensign Ro, but after Deep Space Nine was conceived, they later became a more prominent villain in The Next Generation as well. When I first saw The Wounded, I loved that episode and was instantly intrigued by the Cardassians and thought they were a fascinating villain just from that one episode, so you can imagine my excitement when I learned that they would become the main villain in the new Star Trek spinoff. The Bajorans, however, I was less interested in, as they only appeared in the 1 episode Ensign Ro, and then of course there was Ro Laren herself, who was a reoccurring character in Season 5 of The Next Generation. We learned quite a bit about their culture through her, which would help set the stage for Bajoran culture in Deep Space Nine. However, both the Bajorans and the Cardassians were severely altered for Deep Space Nine. The Cardassians in The Wounded were portrayed as being far less technically advanced than the Federation, as their ships were like annoying little insects compared to the Enterprise, as when they fired on them with their shields down, they didn't even cause any damage. Whereas in Deep Space Nine, suddenly they became a major superpower that rivaled the Klingons and the Romulans, whose ships were perfectly capable of taking on Starfleet ships. The Bajorans in Ensign Ro were more portrayed as refugees that are scattered amongst a handful of colonies that are trying to retake their homeland that was completely taken from them by the Cardassians. Whereas in Deep Space Nine, they were portrayed as a subjugated people who were still on their own home planet but were occupied by Cardassian rule. I know an argument could be made that they were both Bajoran refugees and subjugated Bajorans on the homeworld, as it was never implicitly stated otherwise. However, it's obvious from the tone of the episode Ensign Ro that wasn't their original intentions. The Bajorans in Ensign Ro were more of an allegory for the Palestinians displaced from their homeland, mostly made up of starving refugees, whereas the Bajorans in Deep Space Nine were more like the Jewish people during the Holocaust, who suffered through a similarly atrocious occupation. The other integral characteristic of the show is that it's a port with hundreds of alien races constantly coming and going, which creates an atmosphere for black market and all sorts of other criminal activities, which brings in the character of Quark, who is on the outskirts of these illegal activity, but never so deeply involved to be considered a threat himself. It was quite an original idea to make a Ferengi a major cast member at the time, and quite an interesting one. Having the Ferengi is another alien race that would eventually be changed by Deep Space Nine as well. As in Next Generation, they were played as being an unstable adversary who are capable of destroying starships and other types of violence, while also being incredibly dim-witted. Whereas in Deep Space Nine, they were portrayed as sniveling cowards, incapable of causing anyone any harm, and the character of Quark was extremely devious and cunning, as well as other Ferengis who would show considerably more intelligence than those in Next Generation, such as Zek and Brunt. And Rom was initially introduced as a typical idiotic Ferengi, but later in the show you would learn he's a technical genius. I know many initially had a negative reaction to a Star Trek show having a stationary setting. I remember a friend I had in the 90s that would often say the original series and Next Generation were about them going off and exploring space. In Deep Space Nine, they stopped and stood still. In Voyager, they turned around and just went the wrong direction. And there are many Star Trek fans today that look down on Deep Space Nine because it was not about a Starfleet crew on a starship boldly going into space to explore new alien life and civilization and get into new wacky adventures. However, that's exactly why I like this show so much, because Deep Space Nine is about a stationary location. This forces the show to further develop the alien cultures and characters that we have, rather than just recycling through different ones week to week. And thus, Deep Space Nine would eventually become the most serialized Star Trek show of the franchise, and unlike Voyager, it did not run away from this but embraced it, which is why, in my opinion, it is a much better show. By the end of the series, it became a permanent fixture with tons of well-established supporting characters, creating a vibrant community where episodes could choose different facets of each community to focus on. Rather than other Star Trek series, which always depicted a unified crew, Deep Space Nine allowed for separate adventures and a wide variety of storylines to be explored. One week we could follow Kira on Bajor dealing with Bajoran politics, and next week we could follow Quark and Rom dealing with other Ferengi, and then next week we could follow Worf on a Klingon ship dealing with other Klingons, and the other week we could follow Garrick dealing with the Cardassians, and then the next week we could follow Dax dealing with Trills, or Odo dealing with the Dominion, or Benjamin and Jake Sisko on Earth. The possibilities were endless and diverse. And what ended up doing was creating a rich universe in which we could delve into the different facets of life in this fictional world week to week. And personally, that's what I loved best about Star Trek. Not the exploration, not a Starfleet captain boldly going into space, not technobabbles and warp cores, but exploring a fully developed universe we could play in, have fun, and that's what Deep Space Nine did, and that is why it's my favorite Trek series. And that's the other thing that set Deep Space Nine apart from the other Star Trek series, is that it wasn't simply about a Starfleet crew. In fact, I go as far to say Starfleet characters in the show were my least favorite characters of the entire show, and would say it was better because of the rich cast of alien characters in different backgrounds and cultures with different professions. It made Star Trek feel more like a realistic, tangible universe rather than just another spaceship drama. I didn't think all that much of Sisko. He's not my favorite Star Trek captain by any stretch of the imagination. Picard is a much more interesting character. However, that's not the point. The point is that he isn't the driving force of the show, and the show is a much greater diversity. Also, it can't be denied that Deep Space Nine has a much darker feel to it than any other Trek series, and it has since the very beginning. Although this does kind of go against Roddenberry's vision of the future, I also think it allows for a lot more powerful storytelling that explores the human condition, which much better than most other Trek series do, which is what Star Trek is all about. So now let me go through Deep Space Nine season by season to give my thoughts on each season of Deep Space Nine, starting with season 1. Deep Space Nine was more like The Next Generation in the sense that its first two seasons were really subpar to the rest of the series, and it took a little while to find its footing. While I don't think Deep Space Nine's first seasons were nearly as bad as Next Generation's first two, I did think it was the poorest of the series. The first season in particular was quite subpar. It was obviously they were still trying to figure out what they wanted to do about the show at this stage, and they tried to make each episode centered around ops, much in the same way The Bridge was the center of the action in other Star Trek series, and also tried to create this unified crew feeling. And it was still uncertain what to do with other characters such as Sisko, Bashir, and Dax, whose characters would ultimately be changed in later seasons. And it also resulted in a lot of ridiculously bad episodes such as The Passenger, where an alien body swapper took control of Bashir's body in order to hijack a shipment, or If Wishes Were Horses, where the crew's fantasies would come to life. Boy, that was pretty ridiculous. And plus, you would get the adventures of Jake and Nog, those little rascals. But Season 1 did have some really powerful episodes as well, none the least being Duet, which is not only a fan favorite, but it is my personal favorite episode of all of Star Trek, as it is to me one of the best examples of how a show can be incredibly suspenseful, emotionally powerful, and thought-provoking with a dialogue-driven story that features little to no action or special effects. I'm in awe of this beautiful masterpiece, as too often shows and films will resort to pretty pictures, special effects, action, and cinematography to dazzle audiences when it takes much more talent to pull off an engaging story with just two people sitting in a room talking. So my rating for Season 1 is a 5 average. Because of Duet alone, I can't give this season a lower rating, but because of all the ridiculous and silliness of the other horrible episodes, and in fact the show was still very unsure of where it was going, I can't give it a higher rating either. So next is Season 2, which improved slightly, but still had a different feel from the rest of the series, as it still centered on Bajoran inner politics and criminal activity involved in having many alien races that visited the spaceport. The episodes were hit or miss, with some great ones like Necessary Evil that flashed back to life during the occupation, and Whispers, which was a great eerie episode that explored the possibility of an alternate universe and flipped it on its head by actually having it be about clones instead. The three-parter that opened the season about a Bajoran civil war was very effective, as was the reimagining of the Mirror Universe, where humans have been enslaved by a Klingon-Cardassian alliance. And of course, it started to delve more into supporting characters with the amazing episode The Wire, which delved more into Garrick's deceitful nature and made him one of the more interesting characters in the entire series. But many other episodes missed their mark, such as the two-parter that introduced the Maquis, which wasn't nearly as good as what they were aiming for, and the introduction of the Jem'hadar and the Dominion in the season finale came off as a bit hokey. And there were a lot of subpar episodes like Sanctuary, where Deep Space Nine was overrun with refugees, or Rivals, which was a horrible episode where Quark butted heads with Prince Humperdinck, which was just ridiculous. So my rating for Season 2 is a 6 good. It was a very promising move forward, but Deep Space Nine had yet to find its stride and ultimately still came off as a subpar spin-off to The Next Generation. So then comes Season 3, which is where the show really turns itself around. They took that subpar introduction to the Dominion and turned it into something great. Rather than sitting around waiting for the Dominion to attack like the Borg did, they chose to seek them out to try to negotiate with them. And of course, this is when Deep Space Nine gets the Defiant, a badass Federation warship with a cloaking device. Now, I know some people were against the idea of Starfleet having a warship because it goes against its nature. However, it's said it was originally designed to fight the Borg, and it makes total sense that the Federation would build a warship after almost being wiped out by one alien ship. And I know other people weren't happy with the fact that Deep Space Nine got a starship, as they thought that changed the nature of the show too much. But I don't think so. The show was still centered on Deep Space Nine, but rather than going off on missions on these dinky little runabouts, which were easy to destroy, they can now go trancing off on a badass warship, and that's so much more interesting. But it wasn't just the introduction of the Defiant or the exploration of the new adversary, the Dominion, but the overall quality of storytelling just got so much better this year. We got more exciting episodes like Civil Defense, where a Cardassian program takes over the station and tries to kill everyone. Intriguing science fiction scenarios like Visionary, where O'Brien travels several hours into the future and back again. And great social commentary that is the hallmark of Star Trek, with episodes like Past Tense. And a lot of more political intrigue than we ever got before in Star Trek, with Improbable Cause, where the Cardassian is Obsidian Order, form an alliance with the Romulan Tal Shiar in order to destroy the Dominion. And just overall, you could tell the season had a much higher quality to it, as characters like Sisko, Dax, and Bashir were finding their footing, and we delved deeper into supporting characters like Garrick, Dukat, and Nog. Yes, Season 3 did falter every once in a while, with duds like Fascination, where the crew inexplicably started having crushes on one another, but that was overshadowed by how rich the storytelling was for the rest of the season. Another notable revelation Season 3 brought was where Odo finally found his people, only to discover they were a bunch of genocidal warlords that ran the Dominion. The actor that played Odo once said in an interview that he never wanted Odo to discover his people, and thought if he did, that would be the end of his character. So when the producers told him what they were planning for Season 3, he was resistant at first, but then when they explained the thing about his people being the founders of the Dominion, he was intrigued, and in retrospect, he felt it only made his character even more interesting. And I completely concur. In fact, I would have hated if Odo had never found his people and went the entire series moping on about how he doesn't know where he's from. I was starting to get sick of it just from the first 2 seasons. It was intriguing how little hints were dropped about the Dominion and the changelings here and there during Season 2, and so I knew it was kind of building to something. And the fact that the changelings were the founders of the Dominion just opened the doors to some amazing storytelling. And the way the season ended, with Odo forced to choose between his people and his crew when a changeling infiltrator tried to destroy the ship, that was an amazingly effective conundrum. So my rating for Season 3 is a 10, the best. Overall, the quality of storytelling, the richness of characters, the social commentary on the human condition, the suspense and excitement was all top notch this season. So next season was Season 4, where they introduced Worf into the show as a main character. Now, many saw this as a gimmick, which I'm sure it was. The producers say that if Michael Dorn would have turned down the role, they would have just created another Klingon character to fill that role, which I have no doubt. But still, I question their choice to change the focus from the Cardassians and the Dominion to the Klingons. I do think that was a cry for attention to get Next Generation fans to come back to Deep Space Nine, which I think was a mistake. The show should have went on focusing on the Dominion. I mean, they could have done Klingons here and there as a side plot like they're bound to do, but the main focus should have remained on the Cardassians and the Dominion. I didn't mind the introduction of Worf, but let's face it, the Next Generation, he's basically the guy who just stood at the Weapons Council and just told Picard to blow shit up all the time. He seemed like a completely different character in the context of Deep Space Nine, but overall I thought he did enrich the show, but I never got the sense that he integrated into the crew and always felt a little bit like an outsider even up to the end. However, I was really against their decision to make the Klingons an adversary. I think that was a huge mistake, one that they would correct halfway through the next season when they realized what a big mistake it was. The Klingons are far more interesting as an uneasy ally than an adversary. Like, The Way of the Warrior was a great standalone episode, but they should have left it at that instead of trying to turn it into a long-term story arc. Season 4 still had a lot of high-quality dramatic episodes like The Quickening, where Bashir would struggle to cure an uncurable disease in the face of those who have given up, which I think is one of the most powerful episodes of the entire series. So my rating for Season 4 is an 8, extremely good. Overall, I feel there was a slight dip in quality of storytelling from Season 3, but overall, it was still pretty solid with a lot of great stories. After that, we got Season 5, and I talked about this a little bit in my Voyager review, how this year was overall a bad year for all of Star Trek. I don't know what it was, but the quality of storytelling just took a blow this year for both Deep Space Nine and Voyager, as Voyager produced its worst season ever with Season 3. Season 5 of Deep Space Nine wasn't quite that bad, but it still obviously lost something. It started out with an all-out-and-out war with the Klingons, which of course I hated, and then it had this pointless plot with Odo losing his shape-shifting abilities before they realized it just made him boring. And because Nana Visitor got pregnant, they came up with this ridiculous storyline about Keiko's baby being transported into Kira, which was dumb. And then Rom got with Lita, the station's biggest odd couple. I mean, they were cute, but overall this season just felt way too soap opera-y. I know some of you might be saying, now wait a minute, Season 5 is when they had the Trials and Tribulations, and that's the best episode of Deep Space Nine. First off, I personally resent when people call it the best episode of Deep Space Nine. That's an insult to Deep Space Nine. Don't get me wrong, it was a fun, enjoyable episode to watch, and they pulled off integrating the DS9 crew with the original series crew so well as a must-see, but it is in no way the best episode or anywhere near the best episode of Deep Space Nine. The episode was basically just a gimmick, and that's basically all it was, and it had no real cohesive plot, and the plot it did have was a bit ridiculous. However, like Season 3 of Voyager, it did get better towards the end. Something happened in track where the writers got a kick in the ass and they started to pull themselves around, but it still wasn't that great, but it started to get better, and it's set up for Season 6 nicely. The two-parter when the Cardassians joined the Dominion and the Klingons made peace with the Federation was good. It was good they were correcting a mistake by having the Klingons be the allies again and the Cardassians the foe, but it just seemed all over the place. I mean, several months earlier they were fighting a bloody war with the Klingons and now they're friends again. That's a bit silly. So my rating for Season 5 is a 5 average. There was a noticeable dip in quality this year that produced a lot of boring and ridiculous episodes, but it did start to get better towards the end and had a few standout episodes, so I have to take that into consideration too. So then comes Season 6, which tried something truly new in Star Trek by beginning the season with a 6-episode story arc where the Dominion-Cardassian alliance took control of the station, which still had characters like Kira, Odo, Quark, and Jake left behind, while Sisko, Dax, O'Brien, Bashir, and Garrick were off on the Defiant fighting a war, and Worf and Martok were on a Klingon ship. This story arc was freaking amazing. It was just so good. I mean, we'll overlook that bullshit with Alexander being an adult all of a sudden trying to be a Klingon warrior. Yeah, let's just pretend that didn't happen. But the rest of the Dominion Takeover Station story arc was so good. Dukat and Wayun were just such good villains. I do maintain it was more interesting to see life on the occupied space station than it was to see the Defiant fighting the war. At any rate, the rest of the season focused on the Dominion War, which lent itself to some amazing storytelling, such as my second favorite episode in all of Star Trek, In the Pale Moonlight, where Sisko threw his conscience in the garbage as he lied, cheated, and evaded murder in order to bring the Romulans on their side so they could win the war. It was just so good. And there was a lot of other high quality episodes this season, such as Far Beyond the Stars, Change of Heart, and Waltz. And even the nonsensical Ferengi comedic episodes were actually good this year, with the magnificent Ferengi in Who Mourns for Morn. Again, we'll pretend that stupid Quark cross-dressing episode doesn't exist. And the ending with Jadzia's death, which was a necessary evil because Terry Farrell couldn't tough it out for one more freaking year, was a bit subpar. But overall, an amazing season, so my rating for Season 6 is a 10, the best. Just because they were doing a Dominion War story arc didn't mean it would necessarily be good. But Deep Space Nine was at the top of its game, doing what it does best, and used the war in order to create some top-notch character stories. So finally we get to Season 7, which unfortunately had a very weak start. The two-part conclusion to the Season 6 finale was a bit ridiculous and uninteresting. I personally found the story about Sisko's birth mother being a wormhole alien to be really ridiculous, and they were really trying too hard to make Sisko a mythical figure. And overall, the first half of Season 7 was plagued by a lot of subpar episodes. They tried to conclude storylines like Kor dying in a blaze of glory and the Mirror Universe, and they just botched them and made them ridiculous. Plus, they spent a lot of time building up Ezri's character, which was kind of a waste. And then there was the Siege of AR-558 that showed the horrors of war. I mean, this was a decent episode, but come on. It's a total ripoff of Saving Private Ryan, which had just come out the previous year. I mean, scene for scene. I read an article where the producers were comparing it to some World War II movies from the 50s and 60s and saying, oh, that's where we draw our inspiration. I'm just like, shut the fuck up. It's obviously Saving Private Ryan. Don't embarrass yourself by trying to deny it. And then we got a bunch of episodes with the stupid singing hologram. Now there's one guy that needs to shut up. I watched Deep Space Nine to see good quality drama and science fiction, not to see some half-rate lounge singer singing Frank Sinatra songs for 5 minutes at a time. If I wanted to watch that crap, I'd watch a shitty variety show. You're gonna love me if you all away. See how annoying that is when I do it? It's just as annoying when he does it. Shut the fuck up, Vic! Sorry. However, there were some true gems in the first half of Season 7, like Treachery, Faith, and the Great River, and Enter Armin Iman, Silent Legis, oh that's hard to pronounce, which was an amazingly tense episode. But then, in the back half of Season 7, we got a 10-episode story arc that closed out the Dominion War, and that was amazing. Even though it started out a bit soap opera with Ezri chasing after Worf, it was still overall absolutely great and closed off all the storylines of Deep Space Nine in such an amazing manner. We got to see Dukat trick Kai Wynn and turn her to the side of the Pal race. We got to see the Breen join the Dominion. We got to see Damar splinter off and form a Cardassian resistance to fight the Dominion, where Kira and Garrick were sent to help. We got to see Worf kill Gowron and make Martok the leader of the Klingon Empire, Bashir outwitting and defeating Section 31. It was just one amazing thing after another, and it was always tense and exciting. And ultimately, the series concluded in a dark, bittersweet fashion that was the hallmark of Deep Space Nine and the perfect ending that the series deserves. As it illustrated the horrors of war and ended with the destruction of the Cardassian people, Odo leaving Kira to rejoin his people, Sisko disappearing to become a prophet, it was just amazingly bittersweet. So my rating for Season 7 is a 9 excellent. The subpar quality of the first half of the season prevented from getting a 10, but the amazing high quality storytelling of the final 10 episode story arc very nearly makes up for it. I do believe the season would have been amazing had they made the whole entire season one continuous story arc, but what they did do was great. So, if I were to rank the 7 seasons in order from my least favorite to my favorite, it would go Season 1, Season 5, Season 2, Season 4, Season 7, Season 6, and Season 3 as my favorite. And for my rating for Star Trek Deep Space Nine as a whole is a 10 the best. It wasn't always great. Like any show, it had its ups and downs, but overall Deep Space Nine consistently delivered quality character stories, exciting, suspenseful, and engaging stories, as well as great commentary on the human condition, and did so by delving deeper into the universe of Trek with a large cast of diverse and interesting characters able to explore a wide variety of topics, and it manages to do so in a dark, thought-provoking fashion that always left you pondering its meaning, and that's everything I want from a Star Trek show, making this my favorite Star Trek series. So that's it for my review of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I'm currently doing a series of videos where I do episode reviews from any of the 5 Star Trek series. So if there's any episodes you'd like me to review, just leave a comment below with the episodes you'd like me to review and I'll endeavor to do so. However, I already have reviewed a lot of Deep Space Nine episodes, so you can check out my channel to get all those episode reviews, and make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.